Throughout the ages, leaders and warriors have ascended to great heights of glory, their names and deeds remembered for thousands of years. But among their ranks, we will also find a few animals of legendary distinction. Today, we will be recounting the incredible tale of Bucephalus, Warhorse of Alexander, who charged into virtually every pitched battle of the great conqueror unto the ends of the earth. While our video today will focus on one specific warhorse from antiquity, there are many more amazing stories from across history to be told. To learn more and broaden your horizons, I'd recommend the documentary Warhorse: The Real Story, which you can stream through our sponsor Magellan TV. It does an excellent job recapping the long history of mounted troops in the armed forces with a specific focus on their integration into the British military. We hear from historians, veterans, veterinarians, and all kinds of experts for an incredibly rich learning experience. This comes to a dramatic head with the advent of World War I and the story of the British cavalry's heroic last charge. Documentaries like this are added weekly to Magellan TV, which already has a collection of over 3,000 videos to choose from among the categories of history, science, nature, space, and more. You can watch Warhorse or any documentary that catches your interest by clicking the link in the description below or going to try.magellantv.com/invicta to get a 1-month free trial. Enjoy! Bucephalus came from a long history of mounted warfare in Macedon. Its favorable climate and terrain produced horses of hardy stock with thick bones, strong muscles, and fine heads. Their abilities were further enhanced by a long tradition of breeding and training. The royal stables were particularly renowned for their specimens, which won several riding and chariot races at the Olympic Games. These excellent steeds were put to use by the kingdom's elites, who were known to mount up in combat. We see this during the Greco-Persian Wars, where the Macedonians appear in our records as riders who operated in a similar manner to the Achaemenid kinsmen. This tradition would eventually lead to the development of the Companion Cavalry, some of the finest units of horsemen in all antiquity. Such companions typically owned their horses and were likely rich enough to even have their own stables and employ their own attendants. Those who were of lesser means, however, would be granted money from the crown upon enrollment in the ranks so as to properly equip themselves. As such, there was a constant demand for acquiring the most prime specimens for use as warhorses. The kings of Macedon were some of the greatest customers in this market. Philip II in particular seems to have been an avid fan of all things equine. After all, much of his military overhauls revolved around using cavalry in devastating hammer and anvil tactics. Their success raised Macedon to new heights, vastly increasing its treasure and allowing its king to invest even more sums into the cavalry corps. Plutarch recounts one such occasion that occurred in 344 BC, which will be the lead-in for our story today. I'll let him describe the scene. Quote, Philonicus the Thessalian brought the horse Bucephalus to Philip, offering to sell him for 13 talents. But when they went into the field to try him, they found him so very vicious and unmanageable that he reared up when they endeavored to mount him, and would not so much as endure the voice of any of Philip's attendants. Upon which, as they were leading him away as wholly useless and untractable, a 12-year-old Alexander who stood by said, "What an excellent horse do they lose for want of address and boldness to manage him." Philip at first took no notice of what he said, but when he heard him repeat the same thing several times and saw he was much vexed to see the horse sent away, said to him, "Do you reproach those who are older than yourself, as if you knew more and were better able to manage him than they?" Alexander replied, "I could manage this horse better than others do." "And if you do not," said Philip, "what will you forfeit for your rashness?" "I will pay," answered Alexander, "the whole price of the horse." At this, the whole company fell a-laughing, and as soon as the wager was settled amongst them, he immediately ran to the horse, and taking hold of the bridle, turned him directly towards the sun, having, it seems, observed that he was disturbed at and afraid of the motion of his own shadow. Then letting him go forward a little, still keeping the reins in his hand and stroking him gently when he found him begin to grow eager and fiery, he let fall his upper garment softly, and with one nimble leap securely mounted him, and when he was seated, by little and little drew in the bridle and curbed him without either striking or spurring him. Presently, when he found him free from all rebelliousness and only impatient for the course, he let him go at full speed, inciting him now with a commanding voice and urging him also with his heel. Philip and his friends looked on at first in silence and anxiety for the result, till seeing him turn at the end of his career and come back rejoicing and triumphing for what he had performed, they all burst into acclamations of applause, and his father, shedding tears, it is said, for joy kissed him as he came down from his horse, and in transport said, "O my son, look thee out a kingdom equal to and worthy of thyself, for Macedonia is too little for thee." As history would tell, both horse and rider were truly fated for great things in the decades to come. This would have all begun with a strong foundation of trust building and rigorous training. Unfortunately, history tells us little of what this actually looked like, but we can speculate. For example, we can be sure that Philip played a large role in setting the young prince and his steed up for success. After all, he was the one who brought the best and brightest, like famed philosopher Aristotle, to tutor his son from a young age. Thus, we can expect Alexander to have been supplied with the best trainers, support staff, and equipment money could buy. Truly no expense would be spared. As for what training would have involved, we know a bit about the general practices of antiquity from sources like Xenophon, who wrote a manual on the topic. They discuss a variety of ways that one could learn to mount a horse, for instance. This includes manually pulling yourself up, standing above a prone horse and having it stand up, using a spear and strap as a makeshift ladder, straddle jumping over the horse's rear, or running alongside a horse for a momentum-fueled swing mount. Likely, each had its own specific applications, and all would have been mastered by the athletic young prince. He would naturally have also learned the art of riding a horse in an age before the stirrup. As reported by Xenophon, this involved adopting a standing pose rather than a seated one, with a firm thigh grip but loose hanging legs and a supple upper body ready to move with the rhythm of the horse's motion. In addition, there were all kinds of commands and habits to be practiced continuously so as to meld horse and rider. More advanced lessons involved learning to travel over rough terrain and navigating obstacles. This would have been developed both on special training grounds and out on the wild hunts that were popular among the elite. Perhaps Alexander may have sparred with other boys his age and begun to participate in basic formation practice. In short order though, the young prince surely must have felt himself ready to move on to greater challenges, and likely begged his father to let him ride out to battle. Eventually, 4 years after he had first tamed Bucephalus, the opportunity to do so would arise. In 340 BC, Philip was occupied with military operations against the kingdom's various neighbors, and appointed a 16-year-old Alexander as regent. When trouble broke out among the Mede, a group on the borders of Thrace, the teenager is reported to have gathered a force to march against them. We know little of what transpired, but it is quite likely that he would have carried out his duties atop Bucephalus with the full regalia befitting his position. This must have been a tantalizing taste of what was to come. But it wasn't just Alexander who believed himself meant for this role. According to Pliny, once Bucephalus was equipped with the royal trappings, he would suffer no one but Alexander to mount him. Over the following years, Philip would return to lead the realm directly, but increasingly entrusted his son to take on military matters. For instance, Alexander would be dispatched with forces to subdue new revolts in southern Thrace, and later to repel an Illyrian assault on Macedon. In 338 BC, both father and son would turn south to subdue a new, obstinate coalition of Greek cities. Both sides would clash decisively at the Battle of Chaeronea in 338 BC. Here, traditional narratives hypothesized that an 18-year-old Alexander led the Companion Cavalry to defeat the Sacred Band of Thebes, though more recent scholarship have questioned this narrative. Either way though, it is in this campaign that Alexander and Bucephalus were now officially acting the part of Warhorse and Knight. When Philip was assassinated in 336 BC, a 20-year-old Alexander would ascend to the throne. In the chaotic aftermath, the new region embarked on a whirlwind series of campaigns to reassert Macedonian authority. In these matters, Bucephalus played the part of the perfect steed. For instance, Pliny tells us that when the Macedonians attacked Thebes, Bucephalus would be injured. However, when Alexander attempted to change mounts, the brave stallion would not allow the prince to ride any other steed but himself. From then on, both would be joined forever at the saddle. As a befitting commemoration of their growth together, when the Macedonians returned from Thebes to prepare for the invasion of the Achaemenid Empire, the army would celebrate at the site of Dion, the exact location where Alexander and Bucephalus had met 10 years earlier. For the next decade, The two would go on to fight side by side in a conquest that would take them to the ends of the earth. Based on reports from ancient historians, it appears that Alexander would ride Bucephalus in virtually all of his major battles. It's incredible to imagine the bond that these two must have shared. Each elevated the other and made for a most iconic pairing that truly drew the looks of crowds in every glorious procession through a newly conquered town. They even caught the eye of the famed artist Apelles and Ephesus, whom Alexander commissioned to make a portrait of them. Legend goes that when the painting was done, the king was not impressed. However, when it was shown to Bucephalus, he neighed in approval. Perhaps, though, Alexander was jealous of the flattering treatment his horse had gotten, and now demanded a new version that eventually had him styled as Zeus wielding a thunderbolt. Following the defeat and subsequent murder of Darius, Alexander would be drawn to the far east in pursuit of Bessus. In these long marches, he seems to have wished to preserve the health of Bucephalus, and kept him well taken care of in the safety of the baggage train. Here, the royal grooms could make sure the prize stallion was well fed and kept in excellent health. However, one day, when Alexander was off suppressing the Mardian tribe along the Caspian Sea, the pages that had taken out the royal herd to graze beyond the camp were rushed by a small group of the enemy. These men quickly seized the finest horse they could lay hands on before running away. Unfortunately for them, the horse they stole was Bucephalus. I'll let Diodorus Siculus explain what happened next. Quote, "The king was infuriated at his loss and ordered that every tree in the land be felled, while he proclaimed to the natives through interpreters that if his horse were not returned, they should see the country laid waste to its furthest limit and its inhabitants slaughtered to a man." As he began immediately to carry out these threats, the natives were terrified and returned the horse and sent with it their costliest gifts. They sent also 50 men to beg forgiveness. Alexander took the most important of these as hostages. Over the following years, Alexander and Bucephalus would continue to campaign in the Far East against the most dangerous of foes. Whilst in Sogdiana, for instance, he would even find himself pitted directly against the true horsemasters of the ancient world, the Scythian tribes. In this contest, Alexander and Bucephalus proved themselves ultimate victors at the Battle of Jaxartes in 329 BC. 2 years later, the pair would find themselves fighting against a new set of challengers, the Elephant Lords of India. Here, Alexander and Bucephalus would fight many bloody battles as they cut their way through to the Indus Valley. But perhaps the most famous clash in this new theater of war would come in 326 BC in the Battle of the Hydaspes River against King Porus. This multi-staged engagement ultimately culminated in a massive pitched battle featuring a total of around 70,000 infantry, 10,000 cavalry, and over 100 elephants. Once more, Alexander and Bucephalus were in the thick of the action, charging into the enemy on the wing before ultimately smashing into the rear of the infantry in a pivotal hammer and anvil strike. With this, the enemy was finally brought low, and Alexander upon Bucephalus rose to unprecedented heights of glory. However, the attrition of this most bloody of struggles took its toll. Either owing to battle wounds or old age, the great stallion Bucephalus finally died. In the aftermath of the fight, the Macedonians would honor the fallen with funerary rites, sacrifices, and athletic games. Surely Alexander would have been moved by the loss of so many of his countrymen, but the loss of Bucephalus must have struck deeper than any weapon could. After all, the horse had been his closest companion for 18 years, almost as long as Alexander had known his own father, with the two sharing in moments so famous that they would be written of for millennia to come. As a testament to truly how moved Alexander was by this tragic loss, he founded a new city, Bucephalia on the Hydaspes, in honor of his dearest friend. I hope you enjoyed this fascinating tale about one of the most famous warhorses in all of history. I find that this narrative does a great job of humanizing the character of Alexander and offers a fresh way to engage with and understand the personal side of his immortalized campaigns. If you liked this episode, be sure to subscribe and check out the rest of our content that seeks to bring out the human side of history. See you in the next one.